Hi everyone, my name is Jeeva Senthilnathan. I am a high school senior at the Carter Early Colleges Parker.
My name is Lilianna Flannigan, and I'm a high school senior at Palisade High School in Grand Junction, Colorado.
And so we are starting a project called HS Polls, which is called High School Politics. And we're focusing on the NGN goals, which are 9, 10, 19, 20, 21. And we would like the judges to play the role of politicians as we are focusing on a policy solution.
So to quickly give you a description of a problem that this policy project is attempting to address, much of the legislation that is being written that addresses issues that are affecting young people every single day, like climate change, like gun violence, a lot of that is written by older adult legislators who are not necessarily in touch or grounded in any of these issues. So we want to allow young people to know how they're able to civically engage and educate them on how their government is making decisions that affects them. Millions of young Americans are impacted by different pieces of legislation each day, and we want to insert the youth voice into that process. So we want legislation which is focused on young people to be written by young people so youth voices can be heard. So this solution will be a policy for young people's legislation and young people's action. Essentially, we want to create a marketplace for youth action. And an example of an issue that is very youth specific but hasn't been solved because of adult legislators is taxation without representation. So in the United States, you do have to be 18 years old to vote, but there are many 16 and 17-year-olds who work jobs and have income, and that income is taxed. Now, this income is taxed, but these students and young people are not able to choose who is representing them because those people are going to be allocating the tax dollars. And by definition, that's taxation without representation. So what we want to do is enable young people to create campaigns, start petitions, even engage in scientific research studies so that youth voices can be heard on a factual side as well as on a policy side. So we are asking for $50,000 of seed money for this project. And this is for our first phase. We'd like to present this to multiple schools in Colorado. We're shooting for about 100, and we want to spread this new policy through digital and virtual outreach. Much of that is going to be over social media. So that includes social media accounts, content promotion. And we also need to create a website that has reliable software so that we can provide young people with toolkits to organize themselves and their peers. We want to provide them with access to polls, to comments, to be able to create comments, and to propose their own legislation, have resources to be able to do so. One of these resources will be a hired professional that will mentor young people in bill writing and policy writing, as much of the legal language is hard to understand and truly convey without going to law school. So we feel that this professional will be necessary.
And so our next step would be to go right into Washington, D.C. and engage in 100 schools, as they do have a more stabilized state and federal government. We start to introduce the application for state directors who can then start school chapters. And we would want to hire one full-time partner professional who can look after the finances and these state directors. So we want to start locally where we can introduce this new youth representative policy from their community to their state and then to their country at the federal level. Moving on to our empirical validation, since our policy solution, we want to look at, we ran our campaign through a change petition of about 210 signatures in the state of Colorado, shown to the right with a couple of other states as well. Lily and I both lead on the Colorado Climate Strike Coalition, and so we're able to tie in that legislative action part with the climate strikers. We're also working to get United Nations approval with Sanjeev Thana and Daphne Frias. And so just last session, I was also able to propose a bill to the Colorado State Legislature with Representative Tom Sullivan. And since this is a time of COVID, I was actually able to connect with other youth representatives, such as Dorcas Olatunji from the Delaware State Board of Representative of Education, where she was a youth representative, and she was able to get a certain amount of voting powers and rights to vote on behalf of students. And so she did this in high school from the ages of 15 to 18. Moving on to our financial model, since we did ask for about $50,000 worth of seed money, we're mainly putting that money towards travel, office, fundraising costs, and the state director salary. And so you can see here that we are putting as a $20,000 for the salary because we want to make sure that our directors get motivated and that they have enough and sufficient funds to start their project within the state. At that same time, we're putting a lot more of our money digitally for the website, which is about $10,000, to make more of a creative and engaging website for students who would be really more into the political part of it. Moving on to our underlying assumptions, we did test these out, and so they were the fact that students will be using the polling, it's too political for C-SPAN clips in the classroom, and it's also an interruption of Common Core. And so we tested these in about 100 schools in the classroom, and so teachers thought it was a great idea, and it was a great way to be civically engaged. At that same time, students really enjoyed the social media aspect of this. Some of our milestones is us receiving about $1,000 worth of funding from the Colorado Education Initiative, and we were the top 10 fellows. We also received a partnership report support from HSDA, and so we hope to scale up our project through implementing this into international governments and receiving support from Amnesty International and the Human Rights Watch. Moving on to our sales and marketing, which is our stakeholder analysis. We consider our stakeholders and partnerships to be the International Science and Engineering Fair, the Google Science Fair, and then more political organizations like the United Nations, the USA Youth Climate Strike, and even NGN with March for Our Lives. So how these organizations go right directly into our customer acquisition is the fact that a lot of our political and scientific influencers come from there. So for example, Advait Ramesh, who was the 2016 first place winner in the Google Science Fair, as well as Deja Fox, who is a widely known political influencer on Instagram. They would be given a spot on our leadership, and they would be acting as a board member. And so they would be able to build action teams with our target markets, and we would give them a place to feature in our video announcements, which would be building the credibility and network between us and them. At that same time, our target market would be focusing on scientists, politicians, activists, and the youth, which are basically high school students. And our sales channels would be the consulting/indirect distribution, going right back to our stakeholders and our partnerships. Lily?
So in general, just it's important to note that this is nothing like Model UN. Nothing in this project is going to be synthesized. This will be young people creating real policy that will affect them essentially in real time. We're not training young people how to lobby, and we're especially not training young people how to lobby one specific agenda. This is agenda-free, nonpartisan, and open to everybody. We want young people to be writing real legislation and introducing it into different governmental bodies, whether that's city council or at the federal level. And we want to arrange for as many students to understand how their government works through public access to C-SPAN clips in classrooms that are partnering with us.
So looking towards our competition analysis, we're really unique. And so we don't really have any sort of competition, but organizations that would work similarly with us would be Run for Something or Indivisible. And so what we can do and what they can't do is the fact that we would be providing video announcements directly in the classroom. At that same time, we're only supporting high school students or under the age of 18 types of legislators. We're also creating political startups and connections under this one huge political hub called HS Polls, which is our project. And so we're working to defeat multiple legislators through Congress by the youth. Now, what we can't do, but other organizations can, is that they're already following the law that's supporting above 18 years of age legislators. So many of these kinds of organizations are also progressive, but we're really keeping it open to the youth. So Republican, Democratic, unaffiliated, and independent as well. And so we're not just focusing on political organizations, but we're also adding in scientific organizations as well to have youth to listen to the science, because that is the fact. And so organizations like Indivisible mainly focus on defeating one specific legislator or one specific group like the Trump administration, but we're focusing on multiple.
So to summarize our project, High School Politics will provide legislative support to all forms of government through bringing youth voices to legislators, whether that's through a legislative position or conducting a scientific study. So we want to be able to encompass every possible component of an issue that young people are facing to be able to create holistic solutions through policy.
Thank you for your time. And do the judges have any questions for us?
Great presentation, ladies. I do have one question, and that is, how are you measuring how do you define success, and then how do you measure it?
So how we're actually defining success is through actually running our campaign through legislation written and seeing whether the youth actually like it. So we're having a website, and so with that, we're doing the polling. And so we'll talk about how students feel on a specific type of legislation proposed. For example, gun safety or climate change. And so students typically tend to favor that kind of legislation, but we tend to not really favor legislation towards healthcare, especially like for kids in high school. So that's how we're measuring our success, and to see where the passion really lies for youth. So yeah, did that answer your question? Is there a little bit more clarification needed?
Yeah, just a clarification. So to me, those are issues, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess what I'm asking is, on a particular issue, it sounds like you're encouraging youth to be able to create legislation. In order to create legislation, there's going to be pros and cons to creating the legislation. But I'm trying to understand, is your measure of success that you've created a piece of legislation that can be perhaps taken by a legislator, or is it that you have provided your audience, here's a piece of legislation, here's the pros to it, here's the cons to it, and take a poll?
So we do, here's the pros, here are the cons, take the poll, and then whichever way the students are swayed is the way that we write the legislation. And so a lot of that has the justification with the pros and cons. So how we are becoming successful is when we're introducing into the schools. And so we're having a lot more of students come in through schools, and we're having them look at different types of legislation. And with that, we're allowing them to take action as well. So it's not just the movement building, it's not just the activism, they're also able to provide scientific research that goes along with these legislative pieces. And that's why we're so successful.
And if I could chime in for just a quick second as well. So if we wanted to try and quantify the success, it would really be student engagement within the scope of polling. So when we basically present, so an example would be, we would go into a classroom and present, here are two different pieces of legislation that are approaching the issue of climate change. How do take the poll, how do the students feel about this and that, and then provide that information, that data, to the people who are writing the policy, essentially. So the measure of success, if you really had to quantify it, would be through student engagement in the process.